Sorry, just a sec. Just as people trickle in, so when we get feedback from people about like how the screen is looking, because I know that when the video is too far away, it can be quite difficult to focus, right? When the video is too close up, it can be very blurry. So we do try to meet the needs of people, definitely. But I just want to say I'm open for feedback. One of the pieces of feedback I had was, oh, you guys look really far away. It's kind of hard to focus. So we zoomed in. But then another person said, oh, but we can't see the Buddha when you do that, right? We like to see the Buddha during the teaching. So I have adjusted the screen in a way, I hope, that lets you see the Buddha very well and also lets you see both of us. Yeah, and so last week, quite a few people came to the Sunday, so I had quite a few different pieces of feedback. So we're working on that. One thing I should tell you is that we have been streaming before using the old desktop computer from my dad's office. My dad's retiring this year, so he gifted us like an old desktop computer from his office. That old desktop computer no longer seems to be able to process the video feed from our video camera. So we are going to have to work out a different solution. So in the meantime, I've hooked up my laptop, and my laptop doesn't take the lapel mics, unfortunately. So we are back on the Yeti, but I think especially when we're inside here in the center, it's a relatively small space. You should be able to hear both of us okay. But if there are any problems, please feel free to let me know. So that's the first couple things. The next thing is programming and prayers. So as you know, our precious teacher, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he passed into the final meditation. And there are sort of ongoing prayers for the 49 days. So next Saturday, I will be leading the Chidamani Tara Puja at 10 a.m. Toronto time. And then the Sunday, we will be having this continuing series of Lojong teachings as usual. But on the Sunday afternoon, for folks of you who are local, there is the celebration of life for Arunas, and Arunas's wife, Sharon, she asked me to share that everybody is welcome. And for those of you who live afar but still feel very connected to Arunas, I just remind you that those Thursday sessions are open, and there's like prayers and stuff, but people also have been sharing, nice stories about Arunas and things like that. So feel free to join those if you like. So in terms of programming, we are continuing with this Sunday series. We have something in person on the 5 Powers at the Burlington Public Library, I believe the second Saturday in June. So the first weekend in June, we also have a bit of a change in programming. That's because, so the Saturday is going to be, so for those of you following the Tantric teachings, sorry, all the stuff in my brain, don't know how to communicate it. So for those of you following the Tantric teachings, a lot of people who attended Khenso Rinpoche's empowerments and teachings in the earlier sort of part of the year, they requested to have some oral transmissions. Oh yes, shall I put the musician on? I can do that, yes. Okay, now it's on. Okay. So for those people who attended those empowerments, and also people who have been following Geshe's Chakra Samvara commentary, a lot of people were interested in having the oral transmission for the 6-session Guru Yoga. So on the, I believe it's the first Saturday in June is the 3rd. So on the 3rd, we will begin the Haruka teachings with an oral transmission of the 6-session Guru Yoga. So if you've received the highest yoga Tantra empowerment and you want to receive that transmission, even if you're not following the Haruka teachings and you want to stay just for the first part, you're very welcome to come and receive that oral transmission. Geshe has received it from several of his teachers, including His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. So he'll share that with people. Then, as we go on to the summer, I think one of the things that people like about Lama Yeshiling is that our program is like fairly consistent, right? Like we have classes pretty much right through the year. So we will keep with that tradition. But the one thing that will change a little bit is that it will be every other week. However, there's going to be some additional programmings. One of those additional, so the Haruka will continue once a month. We'll also have an introduction to Vajrayogini, probably just a single session, maybe two sessions. That will be in the summer. And we'll also have something on Kriya Tantra, probably Chenrezi or Avalokiteshvara. We're having a meeting uh, tomorrow in terms of deciding on programming and stuff. So keep an eye on our website and all those details will be coming out. And once again, Kedrup at lamiyeshiling.org. If you have any suggestions, if you have any requests, also if you have something pressing that you'd like to ask Geshe, I'm also very happy to communicate with him and get you his feedback. So I'm always reachable. And on that note, I will invite Geshe down and we'll get started. Thanks for your patience, everybody. Sorry, I forgot the most important thing. Um, Geshe is going to be using Gyose Togme Sangpo's commentary to teach this series. So I've sent Dave in his email. He might have stepped away for a moment. Maybe someone can message him, asking him to check his email. I sent him the text, both the root text and the commentary by Gyose Togme Sampo. Geshe decided to do this commentary because Rays of the Sun is excellent, but he thought less people do the Gyose Togme Sampo. So let's do something a little bit different. So those are all available, and the FPMT translation of the root text is excellent. I'm just using the other one because the commentary was translated using that translation as the basis. But if you want to look at both translations, that's also fine. And I hear Geshe in the background, so I'll get out of the way and we'll get started.
Comedy.
Yeah.
Yes. Ajib.
You'd like to drug him into the Wadi. Me laptop na drug him. Actually, was just asking about the lapel mic, like we're temporarily on site. I think that is a pretty good view of the both of us. Hopefully that works okay. And is the sound all right, everyone? Can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me? Okay, excellent. Let's get started.
Listen, so the order.
So firstly, Tashidele, greetings to all Dharma friends. Geshe hopes that you're well. He hopes that you are happy. So whether we are formally a believer in Buddhism or not, all of us have this wish to be able to live our lives both peacefully and happily.
다 개왕에는 드비깔라도 끊어더니 개시라요 말했더니 끊어가지나 자체모 그랬더니 저도 다 대셔도요. 그게 아이사 대지깔래 다 용거서 왔어.
So Geshe is saying, of course, if we're thinking about maximizing the positive accumulation, right, the accumulation of virtuous karma from the session, we need a motivation that's a little bit vaster than that. But in terms of being able to integrate to improve our lives, this motivation is a good start, wishing to be happy and peaceful.
다 로로 소소 같은 벽에 다방인에 지는 거야 그로 차통아. 타바스나 마사나 된다 강에 유주파 매와서야 다로 차통아절 마셔줘야 손에 같이 모래 되어레스.
And also, it's really important to place imprints in our mind stream for the complete path. We can say we need to put imprints in our mind stream for the complete path to liberation. Another way of looking at that is we're just putting the imprints within our mind stream for the path to freedom from all of our problems. It's really to freedom from all of our problems.
我当俺罗苏刚刚罗了这个有呢要不知道呢我做了就要嘛的是
And this is connected also, right, with this idea we have about the self, that the self is not finite, that the self, or that we call the I, is a continuity. It continues and continues.
我俺这俺是做着要去吧我但是我俺嘛都什么时代的没把去这把前面是年说那等那个我查从我过怎么来着拉出来的
And this is actually really important because if people could make a convincing final argument that past and future lifetimes are not a thing, that at the end of this life, the consciousness is finished, then a lot of the teachings of the Buddha Dharma could be argued to be sort of no longer necessary, not based in valid reasons.
我他没在记了来了记都小娃子的还怎么送了都个样嘛这是可是没呢
Re-
아고서라 나세아도 돈로야지도
that's-
수학가마도 심하세아 매나
Yeah.
다 맞지 거小娃子的来了지마도 된서 손도 그야 말했어.
And in a way, that would be a little bit simpler, wouldn't it? Because if the I was finished at the end of this lifetime, if there were no past and future lifetimes, no reincarnation and so forth, then all we'd really have to worry about is taking care just of this lifetime, just trying to be peaceful and happy in this one lifetime.
我他그내지第三部集在소설로 대조사 주요하래 또제시해 주요하래我他마통와도 매바통와니를 제와 친구요하래.
So, just to be clear, in terms of past and future lifetimes, you are allowed to use your intelligence, of course. You are allowed to doubt these things. You are allowed to question these things. No one's arguing against that. But Geshe would remind you that not being able to see something with our eye consciousness and that thing not existing or not being there at all, those are two different matters.
我他你我在你的感情不来，我他你我马的这个地方，我他等这些在可以把个头呢，罗查从都干的干这些人的，我他把车上的干这些人的，我他电机刚刚要不干个法律。
So we want to understand how do we make our mind vast and how do we integrate the complete path so that we can plant seeds for all the qualities of the complete path within our mind stream so that we can put imprints for the entire path within the mind stream.
我他数据更多更多了，所以数据干的啦，逻辑弄了没有啊？来，没人开始开始好得干，빨래치는 시라자么干，罗说说了开始个杜巴些个呀，人家逻辑没问题哇。
So we read in the stories, also the stories from the time of the Buddha, right, about great practitioners who they'd hear just a couple of lines, just one shloka or verse of Dharma. And on that basis, they'd be able to give rise to realization.
我当然对以前节目拖的不要认识，那这些人等于也是都个要那，人家现在他去给就拖个要那，说说，就还来就要认识。
Oh yeah. And to think, how could somebody be able to, for example, bring forth wisdom realizing emptiness? How could somebody bring forth realization just based upon hearing a single verse? It seems almost unbelievable, right?
我他대지를 했더니 다 제 치료 강간을 줄 알았어. taniga lamari momo yungiyare paji derwa musanda yungiyarwas tani shulo karela tene tubashi gayade shindo kawayina la tani kashi yungiyare.
And so, in terms also of hearing about realization just from a single verse or a few lines of Dharma, we hear about this in many of the different Buddhist traditions, right? There's these stories about these great beings. Just through hearing one verse of the Dharma, they achieved enlightenment and things like that.
Oda tejilla tane ya lama toka bai sana madu tanga rosu karasi sungiyare sana tade lechochi esmitawiyares.
So, Lama Tsongkhapa and others refer to Hadu Lidoche, which I would say means something like starting exactly where you left off. So it means that you had something left over to do, and you're able to start exactly where you left off in the next life to complete it.
다 내가 차송아 다 tamam 아도 차소 내차네를 깨지 줄어요나. 오다 드리그리 되래. 봐줘 뭐서 미추 아마 미야기 되세 마도 야 그거야 말했어.
So for this particular person, they have just the remainder of a little bit of work to do. And they're starting from where they left off in the previous lifetime. And the imprints from that previous lifetime are so strong that you just add a little bit of fertilizer, you just add a little bit of a condition, and those imprints can ripen into a realization, seemingly almost instantaneously.
그래서 오다 드리 오다 tinja 대지메 하고 그지 같이 뭐래스. 드릴다와이나 봐줘 싸바이나 계속 첨부 여바지도 디세지를 먹지 여바데 답을 야 좋아지 뭐 이거 왔어.
So as we engage on our Dharma practice, it's important to keep this in mind, that all of the positive things we're doing are placing those imprints and those seeds within our mind stream. And there will come a time where the conditions manifest, allowing all of those to ripen.
그래서 다요 로도도 여보 지시바이나 차송아 여보 시키면 소소 녀래 지프게시도 지시바이나 디세 리본고 그야게 내서 좀 멋지를 더다 당한도 로질 뭐 왔어.
And so also another point to make here is that if one knows the complete path from beginning to end in a very methodical, effective way, it is possible to be able to go from the beginning and reach enlightenment in one lifetime. It's not necessarily the fact that the journey will take many lifetimes.
다 어떠냐 같이 도면서 투두게야 멋지게 주토야 멋지게 강가토야 돼 요다 와시고야.
So it's clear that when practiced in a very complete way, in one lifetime, we can accumulate the equivalent of the 3 eons. The 3 eons or kalpas of merit that are said to be necessary for enlightenment, and we can complete the path in one lifetime. This is also something that is possible.
어다더니 못터네 단도 못이야 맞아 뭐 가디나 뭐지 용거야 왔어. 어다 뭐 용기르지나요. 유는 셰바노 이 치대지 타니에 되지. 몇째 또 토나? 근데 저와도 와이나래 소소 레자바 이나래 오 그게 비도버지 용거 왔어.
타니에 든소시에나 좋아.
야 눈을 나봐줘 그러죠.
The other thing too is having a precision of knowledge. God, you guys are stuck with me, so I don't know if it's going to work for you. So I'm saying this. And so the precision of knowledge comes from knowing the Buddhist terminology exactly. If you are very familiar with the appropriate terminology, this can cut right through to the concept and help bring forth understanding.
맞아. 소소 세는 뭐 여보 제대바 이나 대포게 나야 돼도 포게니 똑같이 말해나.
Yeah.
하고서 좋아.
개개인이나 좋아.
야 서이는 매 맞아. 서이나 좋아 또 개이나요.
So Geshe was saying that, and once again, you're working through translator, so it's like even another veil, right? But Geshe was saying that when the teacher can convey what they understand from their experience and explain that to the student, and also when the student has the knowledge and the vocabulary to ask the question in a very precise way, this can also be very effective for bringing forth realization. Yeah.
디스마 어떤 눈을 시에 대하되 나로서 그 세를 요 초와 요 봐도 되지도 내가 요 봐는 주주식이 요하레스
Yeah.
하고서
Yeah.
와 대노지 배지 또 도나
Mhm.
제가 저와도 내가 강에서 오줘야 오려와 요하레스
Because actually, everything that we're explaining are all things that are based upon practical applications to our mind, things that we can apply to our mind and that we can experience. So, if we have the knowledge and the vocabulary to be able to kind of relate our experience very precisely and pose questions very precisely, this is also very useful.
我得是得嘞，等你等到企业的做把教要不少吧，因为我打偏头要把这个我嘛都没几岁就长路要，我打多半那些个么都是，我打些我打路开始人呐，我等你进来把长路要是吧？
So, the reason that Geshe is emphasizing this today is because he actually wants you to be hopeful. All of the effort that you're putting in here, right, to listen, to put these imprints, to put these seeds in the mind, none of this is going to be wasted, right? It is all going to come to a result. Because otherwise, what happens is people are like, well, I've been doing this for a few months and nothing's happening. And then they get discouraged, right? So it's important to understand that none of our effort is wasted.
我打背要背死我背下来要个追什么么都念不起了，我为那个照片了，我们家他跟他了可背下，跟学个是吧？好个是吧？
Yeah.
哦，背下学背干了，跟他下去那了，你嘛对了，你嘛对你了去过得个是吧？
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
啊，你可以背下的些个子了，可下的你跟路呀嘞。
So, probably to illustrate this story, some of you may have heard this before. We have the story of the great Indian Pandit Vasubandhu, right? And Vasubandhu was in a kind of like a retreat type of situation, like a cave or a hut. And as part of his retreat, he was reciting a text. And there was a little bird just outside his kind of window who would listen to him reciting. But the bird would get tired, and somehow, when he reached about the halfway point in the text, the bird would always drop off to sleep.
我小姨嘛得了，有些个的，我嘛蒙不过在一在考，连老我都能考西中嘞。
It was said that in his next lifetime, when he studied that text, the first half of the text, he was able to understand very easily with very little effort. And that was, of course, because of his habituation of hearing that many times in his previous life.
我打些个的别个来要是要的，是罗有钱都打了，可能罗有钱就要了哇，这是我们过年跟着要了。
Yeah, yeah. The second half, he had a terrible time. So he was like a student of Buddhism in his next lifetime, right? The bird. So he had a terrible time. And that was because, he had never heard that entire text recited. And so those imprints were not in his continuum. It was a lot harder work to understand.
我打第一点别个了，打可能你的理解了，可能罗为因为我们家里的罗就这个这的国家的学的要了，可第一点呢，啊第一了可能就拉嘛都拉嘛长个，来我第一啥巴的是，嘛看这个的流行个要嘞。
And they jela Vasubandhu datungere korongi get
야, 걔도 전부 시작하고 됐어.
So it is said that just from this little bird hearing Vasubandhu recite, and Vasubandhu reached quite a ripe old age. So by the time that bird passed away and was reborn, there were enough years left in Vasubandhu's life that he actually became a student of Vasubandhu and was able to study with him. So this is kind of the effectiveness of these imprints. So, sorry, I don't know the Sanskrit, but his name became Ludrin Tumpa. So he was called Lopun Ludrin Tumpa. So Lupin means he was a pandita, right? So he became a very great scholar in his human lifetime.
Oh, that did it. So that is on not not or Nicola Lieutenant, you don't assume to us, or that can to Bashesa Marino, but you and Gonzagil Corotipasona, but just Asuna, only a lot of time in Bochaya Julia.
So just this words of the holy beings that realization is not something that is impossible. So do not be discouraged. As long as we continue this process of putting the positive imprints or seeds within the mind, there will come a time where those ripen into realization.
Oh, that Nicola say when you want to catch him, you do it. That you are dead on yonder and Nipasaya to Halevi catch him. No.
So we want to transform the mind on the basis of these instructions. That happens through application. And we also want to put all of these imprints and seeds within the mind. So the power of the application and also those seeds are both very important. And of course, the positive energy, the merit from that, as Buddha Shakyamuni said, one who possesses great merit is able to reach their aims exactly as they wish. So also, all of that merit definitely makes a difference. 네, 저도 공부해. 자동. 자동 이내에 때는 저 좀해봐, 너도 좀해봐, 라바 강간 알레니까 내가 매봐지소기니스. So, as the preliminary, we'll do a brief meditation as usual. And Geshe is just explaining this brief meditation as a way of kind of rendering attachment and anger sort of immobile, unable to do any harm. So let us begin the meditation. So to begin, let us just relax without chasing after thoughts, without paying attention to the thoughts that may arise. The nature of the mind is pure and clear, just like pure, clean water. So then let us take as our object of focus in this meditation breath. Breathing in, I'm aware I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I'm aware I'm breathing out. And whatever distraction arises, whatever discursive thoughts may arise, we don't panic, but we also don't chase after those thoughts. We just think, I'm not going to pay them any attention. Mindfulness, in this sense, is remembering. When we're breathing out, remembering to pay attention to breathing out. When we're breathing in, being aware we're breathing in. And now that we have this calm state, we'll do an exercise where if a feeling arises, if a thought arises, we'll examine the appearance of that feeling or thought. What is it like? Then think, by being able to examine this thought, by being able to identify it as wholesome or unwholesome, I just note it and then I can let it go. I don't need the thought to control me. I don't need to chase after the thought. And as we observe, we'll also see the ephemeral, the impermanent nature of that thought. It's just like a cloud in the sky that, with the sun's warmth, will fluctuate and eventually dissolve away.
차송하다 멜룰 하다만 노지 셀 코로 시셀이 용할 파셀 바 더송송하지.
And we can do a little bit of a visualization. Just imagine, just like you breathe ha on the surface of a mirror, and that condensation dissolves into the central point and disappears. Think all of the discursive thoughts in my mind dissolve into the subtle mind.
니엘 좋아 조매봐 너도 조매봤더니 여봐 이나인다 발레시시 나벌리 얘도 강가 그용 본다고 세도 강가 그용 본다고 좋아서
Think by learning to identify and not chase after these thoughts, not chase after these projections, by allowing these thoughts and projections to fall away, to dissolve into the subtle mind. My body and mind are now vast and at ease. I am in a peaceful state.
세 코로가 로지 돈요가 로지 잡 류마테가 로지 지자 다 대노지 가르치나 제초주라고 하고 좋아서
And think by having my mind peaceful in this way, I can tap into the nature of the mind, which is neutral, which is equanimity. And based upon that foundation, I can bring forth, I can perfect any positive mental quality I want.
랭 세가 로지세나 뭐디 세가 네츠 코로 아빙모 메바 호다 가르런 저와 또와 이나이다 저와 로야요 나오지.
I think also I see in this way that the nature of my mind is not something permanent. It's not something static. That means that the mind is malleable. I can change it. I can transform it.
메일레야보 되게 다 세대 송바야쇼 송바도 이지쇼야 데모 티도 같이 저거 이
Bring forth this determination with this human body and the human mind, the intelligence that that entails. I will direct my efforts to bring forth love and compassion and to be able to perfect love and compassion.
송바도 니지 다 송바도 뭐 아니 야쇼르지도 저도 뭐 리반
Those supreme manifestations of kindness, love, and compassion, I will infuse my mind with them and mix my mind with them completely, just like milk and water.
됐다 영화지 세 디니 다 소하다요
To be able to actualize this wish, I am going to, from the bottom of my heart, from the depths of my mind, make the prayers and requests to the holy beings. Tumbo John Den De Jun Jun Ba Ba Jong Ba Yon Da Ba Zo Song Dong Shou Zhu De ba de wa shi ba ju de ba ge bo do ka lo yo wa la na ba la da ge ba sa chod ya shai kya tu ba la chu sen do chu do ya bisu shu Tenpa chomden den teji sheba da chompa yang da pa zobe sangye sheba dang sha su denpa dewa sheba shite jenpa jeba dobe kalo gyorpa lana meba lada mi namgi tenpa sangye chomden den peja wa cha cha do pa la cha su Chedo Josu Chi Fu Tenpa Chom Den Teje Jeba Da Chompa Yanda Ba Zube Songye Jeba Da Shasu Tenpa Dewa Sheba Jide Jemba Jeba Doye Kalo Gyorwa Ana Meba Lada Mi Namgi Tenpa Songye Chode上家的老了朝鲜，觉得要是有 short mandala offering. Oh, Jogun has Shin Shin Pa Jo Guru Namendala Gun Aya Lost my Sanje Shedon Zojo Jono La Jonju Badu Dani Gyatsu Chi Dagi Chi Je Jibe Sunam Je Jola Benjir Sanje Joba Shedan Sogi Chenam La Jangju Badu Dani Gyatsu Chi Dagi Chi Je Jibe Sunam Chola Bejo Songye Choba Sho Songye Chedon Sogi Chenam La Jangju Bardo Dani Gyalsu Dagi Chenyen Gebe Sonage Chola Penji Songye Choba Sho So I see things flash across my screen and I saw a bubble flash about the sound. So I just want to make sure, can people hear us all right? And should I, when we go from the prayers to the teaching, does it help if I change it out of the musician mode or it doesn't? Okay, just wanted to make sure. Geshe was like, what are you what are you up to? So okay, yeah, but if there are any problems, let me know and we'll adjust.
Why that they were telling Arosu, Tanga, Sedia, the Halea, Tanita, Pagare. So, when it's also in it, that Deshi Tashamba. Only Yella, Deshi Tashamba,
And so in terms of our destination, this I or this self that we see as so important, and also the I or the self that other beings view as equally important for themselves, we want to be able to lead all of those to a state of lasting happiness, to a state of perpetual peace.
Akasara, that day is that they elaborate was and like a social people Tawina, that daily like a chega yamare, then it had yes or not on a daily to Yachiga was.
So, of course, this is a great task, right? Think about all the things that we would need to do to create the cause to have that lasting happiness, to have that state of permanent peace. And here we're talking about not only doing that for ourselves, but also trying to help other sentient beings achieve that. So, this is certainly a great endeavor.
That day you want to Powa Chimbochi, don't Nipa Chimbochi man, and you want to marry and to Manda Pivika, in as on poverty you are. Future to you are.
And to actually really go for that goal, to really try and achieve that aim, takes courage. And it is said that actually, when we offer this mandala, part of what the mandala offering should help us do is bring forth that confidence and courage to work towards that.
Then it macho then the Hele and Dembicala, the guys and the mandate Dejimer. Sunji gay, the Sungi, the Tachoro, the Lukin, the data in shots of years and some to Kulans.
And also, when we recite the preliminary prayer that begins Tumba Chomdende Dejin Shepa, we shouldn't just be kind of like reciting these sounds mindlessly, but we should be reflecting on what are the qualities of the Buddha's holy body, his holy speech, and his holy mind, right? These chants are also a mode of reflection.
Koro Deva Tashima, the Nichil and Donald Hele Madevachi, Mangaroso Yata, Deva Yapochil and Doyaga, Lord, and repeat up and down that there's a Karin Gana. And the Kakasakala, Karin Deva Sachu, the Nijis to Sujantis.
So the Buddha wasn't satisfied with just achieving peace and lasting happiness for himself, right? He continued to work. What did he work towards? Towards laying out a complete path that we could cultivate to reach that same happiness and that same peace. And in fact, in a way, he made this easy for us. It is as if his teachings are a banquet that has been laid out for us. We just need to make the decision to get up and eat.
That so the Jibo Taban Deva Yavaina, that Donald Pugin Road, Chatswachi. That yes, and Jeroji, you do forget how I have and Rovina in Dolo, Matoman and the Indigenous and Halag to us.
And another amazing thing is that within those teachings, there is also choice. If we feel like we want to just focus on our own liberation and reach a state of lasting peace and happiness for ourselves, there's a way to do that. If we feel that that's not enough, that we want to be able to lead all other sentient beings to liberation from suffering, there is a path step by step available that will help us to do that.
That late on becoming in a chinning to test that so like a cherry in a jet who you are. Ye Kanga Dachi to Muda, Tanga near the Tanga Yopotana, to so the ship of Yungas had Agnes was.
And so many of these teachings are immediately accessible for us to implement, even as a beginner. Just thinking, for example, that all of these sentient beings are close to me. There is not a single enemy within them. All of them are close to me and they are all precious. Just actualizing that simple teaching, think about how much happiness and peace that's going to let you bring into your life.
Lila Marvas, do I read to the near to Jure, do I read to Chicho Pajaman do that Agnes.
And of course, as we expand on it, right, then it's not so easy. We think about all 6 types of sentient beings. within samsara are close to me. I don't have a single enemy even within the 6 types of sentient beings. But we start with that mind and then we perfect it up to that point until it becomes incredibly vast.
다 드니자지 시에게 소소가 대시 그게 그것도 같이 영화한테 생체 레레리나 인데와 요아이서 다 할래 내가 띵주 그때 나 전부지래스.
Also, packed within that teaching, understanding that every single happiness that I enjoy is connected with other sentient beings. That makes us realize that our happiness is not something random. It arises depending on particular causes. So within that teaching is also information on dependent arising.
당한도 레 돈비까니 야보 드리지네 때에서 저노도 와인 할 레베세 거유 바쳐야. 오반다마다마게 봐. 강가 따치 뭐야 봐. 돈스지 요소 가디 맞고 쳐야지. 레 돈머니 지센디 와스.
And so from the very beginning, if we implement what we hear in our mind, we will become more open-minded. We will have a vaster outlook. With a vaster outlook, we'll have less suspicion, less doubt, less stress, and we'll already be able to experience quite a stable level of happiness just from implementing those instructions.
예 레간다마다 노아 뭐보지라테네 강에 용거 요아르테네 코로를 이제시야르마도 코다마레스 코 녀모가 좀어디 드리지 시에그레테네 할래야지 아레스.
Just switching how we see things. If somebody makes a mistake that affects us, right? Then instead of feeling anger, we feel compassion for them because we realize they aren't truly free. They are under the influence of the afflictions, and because of this, they make mistakes, which can be causes of their future suffering. So then we just change our outlook, right? And then we are able to have compassion for them.
다 못하려고 다 되면 당긴것만 가지고 이래면 고자돼야 돼. 아니 다 처음 저는 안돼 이제 내 저라봐 군도라봐 노도라봐 저라봐 다 좀 해봐야지. 아니 바삐야를 내가지레스.
So in terms of the meditation that we started with, it was just like a kind of a very simple meditation in terms of those coarser afflictions like anger and attachment, anything that may have been in our mind stream this morning, also any strong feelings of discomfort and so forth, or any namtok, discursive thoughts, right? That wheel of the mind, those discursive thoughts. We did that meditation as a way to kind of pacify those.
답변은 간소이나 다 간소래 돈비카르세라마도 이것도 와도 좀만 거 아니데 요도 이것도요 말해.
So there's a Tibetan idiom. I'm not sure. I understand the idiom, but I'm like, where is this going? So it says that you can't eat tsampa and play the flute at the same time. That's the idiom. So those of you who don't know what tsampa is, it's a flour-like substance made out of barley that is the Tibetan staple. So you can't play tsampa and play the piwang, play the flute at the same time.
답변에 노지 알아서 세트 괜찮지요 말해. 세가 연인 요도 내가 제도요 말해. 나요 제도월라는 또 더러웠어.
So this is important for meditators because we understand that our mind cannot engage with two objects at once in any meaningful way. Of more advanced meditators, that's another discussion. But in terms of us as ordinary beings, our mind cannot engage with two objects at once in a meaningful way.
아니 배드 정보 할래비 아버지 마트면나 딩고 다 메뉴다 사버지 대요나
Yeah.
다 소소 이 그게 대사요 말어.
Right. So we gave the example before about many lamas talk about it is as if your mind has that distraction that is blocking you from engaging with the object of meditation. So it's like if you're in a movie theater and every seat is full, or if you're in sort of a dormitory room and every single bed is full, you have no place to focus and rest your body, just like you'd have no place to focus and rest your mind.
다지 마트면 비슷하다.
Ale.
그래서 니 그자지 마트면 다 실로 할래비 때문에 벌써 잘라봐이나 고만도서는 됐어.
So you kind of trick the mind a little bit. And the analogy is you see one of the people in the movie theater, or you see one of the people in the dorm room sitting on the bed, and you say, oh, what's happening out there, right? And that distracts them enough that they get up and take a look, and then you can plunk yourself down in that space that's been created.
어떤 간주 세트 되래. 코치 찌 자수나 연도 용 토요 말에. 서나.
So, yeah, it's an analogy, not advocating that behavior, Geshe said, but it's an analogy that our mind is like that, right? If we're preoccupied with something, we have to figure out some way to create some space within the mind so that we can do our meditation.
我打手机呢得手机呢了打个是真用了没些把对吧？原来地拍都得用个呀嘞。
And so, one of the ways to do that is to just let go of thinking about anything and just try to kind of hold the mind as like a blank slate, right? This is a temporary measure.
他伊那运的我经过了，伊那的没动的我伊那的，看着伊那每季水土呢，可能不给谁对吧？伊那，真的真把那用拍多久，西拉那用拍多久，你他弄多把，伊那用拍多久啊？
But Geshe said even better than just trying to empty the mind of thoughts is to take an object of focus. We could take the breath. We could even take the image of a flower if we wanted and try to hold that within the mind single pointedly. This can also help us to create space, but it also helps us cultivate other things such as mindfulness and introspection, which are such important tools in meditation.
等我当个姨妈就把俺做打下来的，是错가를用个都，我都가를用个都，可是这打完伊呢，他确有比错，确没比错啊，是他我写了，搞来有，拍多用啊，是个嘞。
And that mindfulness and introspection can also help us to be aware and observe when feelings or thoughts arise, to be able to distinguish, is this wholesome or is this unwholesome? Is this something to be taken up? Is this something to be abandoned? And so forth.
내가 시와 옛날에 군조 시와 옛날에 그때 못다가 너지 콜다니 대바 이나 길내가 제마도 키쇼스 도와 있는데 다 녀다 되는 거야.
So, for example, when anger and attachment arise within the mind, if we're not aware that they're arising, and if we don't take a moment to kind of step back and observe them, what happens is that anger and that attachment can lead us into that negative direction. We'll be compelled into negative action, right?
그래서 어따때 매할래 같이 뭐 이사래. 서단데 좋아시와 있는 군조 시와 있는 뭐시한테 같이 뭐이 쇼스만 도와도 될리죠 같이 알아봤어.
So, firstly, recognizing when the attachment and the anger arise within the mind is very important, and for that we need introspection. And also having the mindfulness that's not going to follow in that direction where the attachment and the anger are trying to lead us. This is very important.
어따 내자대 있는 그뭐 시와지도라고 어제 공고도 이렇게 봐지고 생각했어.
And attachment is particularly pernicious. It's particularly dangerous because the feeling of attachment isn't immediately negative. It's more like our best friend. It's like one of the cool kids, right? That wants us to kind of follow along with them. That's what it's like. Geshe didn't say cool kids exactly, but it's like that's the best approximation I can do of what he said. So someone who can influence us in a seemingly positive, right?
다 딜로는 너무 기와 노지 쇼걸 넘지 타마테에서는 다 거갈래 저는 그 당갈래 뭐 왔어.
And it's a slow process. The example that's given is like a piece of paper or a square of cloth. If you put a few drops of oil just into one corner of that, slowly, oil will permeate the entire piece of paper or the entire cloth.
다 어떤 뭐 준지지 마디요. 일단 여자 여사 말해서 지가.
So attachment's like that, when it's in its nascent stages, in its beginning stages, we're like, that's not such a big deal, right? I don't need to worry about that. But it creeps up very slowly.
다 어시부터 막 가시 롱보치 너 사자. 롱보치. 사자 알레빈 너 저도 사고 녀도여 봤더니
los.
갈래 제 맘만 들으면 말아.
But attachment can be very dangerous, right? The great masters and the texts, they talk about it's like quicksand for an elephant, right? So when the elephant first steps into the quicksand, he or she doesn't immediately think he's in danger. They only realize that when the slow process of sinking is well underway.
거의 자손을 저대한테 뭐지를 다스려가 제게.
So really, also, part of what keeps us circling, right? Circling in this whirlwind of samsara is that affliction of attachment. But in the beginning, we don't realize that. We're just like that elephant who's walked into a patch of quicksand. And when we see the conflicts in the world, when we see the wars being fought in the world, these are often over resources and things like that, right? So once again, that can be traced back to attachment.
我到朝东那个嘛，说话，他记住把什么东西出来了，是那个看看。
So really, there's no problem in the world that we can't link somehow to attachment or to aversion.
我到摩托送我是等于我弄等于个不呀，等于大把人呐，大说话都弄出等于大头把人，说说啥人弄的确实搞把人那用，必须弄的给人家么的，也是等于呢，别说了等于对吧人呐，他不是话，那点等于对吧人呐，那这个是你把西马多呢了，说说对那就好了。
Like donong tena in
아, 디쇼를 만들어라.
Chocolate madroid.
쇼로는
Yes,
단든 요다
yeah,
사고
okay.
가세는 될 단에 대바이나 소설에 내바 용도요 아마.
So another thing is that this practice of introspection and this practice of mindfulness means that, for example, if we're in the city in a really busy or chaotic part of downtown and something kind of crazy is happening, or if we meet with someone who we see as our enemy, someone who we find very difficult. Because we are used to, in meditation, cultivating the attitude of the observer, that gives us space not to immediately fall into being influenced by those external circumstances and being disturbed or compelled to negativity.
아, 다 돼지 다 개발했는데 와 맞아. 소속 콘도사 기본에 봐서는 파셔도 소리라고 말. 소속 기본에 봐서 콘도사와이나 쇼로 잠에 반 자고 말아왔어.
It's really something useful, isn't it? Because just like feeling like we dislike someone or getting angry at them, that doesn't mean that they're all of a sudden going to become an easy person. Does getting angry at them help the situation? No, we know that it doesn't, right? So sorry that was too much, but this is just to show the point of a lot of these teachings on transformation are things we can immediately apply. So we'll bring forth a good motivation.
당가로서 강가로 양송제 강가로로다 소소 있는 소소 예 있는 어떤 것이 봐도 뭐지 봐 강가로라 어다 대화 그거 요바 지바이 뇽바이 선바지 세동요.
So bring forth a mind of equanimity, thinking that every single last sentient being in the world, whether myself, whether others, the people close to me, the people far away, those sentient beings who I have never met perhaps, we are all in every way that matters the same, in terms of that we all want happiness and none of us wants to suffer. Cultivate this mind of equanimity. The equanimity recognizing the sameness of all things.
대화 춘춘이 주테니까 되지 다되게 되지 내가 그거 봐 지바이 단 다도만 용바이.
All of us are 100% the same. We want every tiny happiness that we can possibly get. We want to avoid even the slightest suffering.
안에 기wo 매비 다 내지나요 다 제주 간지지나요 다 뭐가 돼 지바이 뇽바이.
All sentient beings, when they meet with calamities, when they meet with misfortune, when they meet with sadness and difficulty, all of them experience suffering. We are all the same in experiencing the suffering due to those unpleasant circumstances. So, of course, it isn't just enough to merely see this, to merely accept this, that all sentient beings are the same in wanting to be able to avoid even the slightest suffering and be able to achieve even the smallest happiness, because they're not able to do that in any meaningful way.
던지게 대시 그래서 주바 다도게 대시 돼야를 되도지 가라 이나 하소서 그 리바시는 되도 바시는 내 생제 유즈 다 들려가지고 소
Think every sentient being needs a happiness that is lasting, that is meaningful. I myself must achieve that happiness, realize it for myself, and then work to lead every being to that very same state.
세제 대다게 치는 거로서 나세 대다 수지는 이제 도망이다 그래서 뭐지 찾아봐서 이
That I call the self, or that I call the I must achieve the state of the Buddha, or my deity, such as Tara. If I achieve that state of enlightenment, I can lead all sentient beings to that similar lasting state of happiness and peace.
뭐야 되지
So we'll pause there.
이소가 다 그런 되는 세계 시제 되는 다시 좋아 야 다시 뭐 가는 거 좋아하면 뭐 괜찮아 아니 그러면 괜찮아
So we'll turn to,
다 돼지 간가 가지 뭐 저렇게
so we'll turn to the text. I said to Geshe, oh yeah, we're halfway through the class. He's like, yes, that was all really important stuff. It was. I just get impatient.
돼지
What can I
저렇게
say?
돼지를 같이 가는
He's like, patients are in the text. What's more important than that? It's
서로
true.
해서 그래 그래서
It's like,
다 되면 다 던지고 다 저도 제 가르 그거 요매 다 되는 차도 요거 야이서 다 나서 템보 진 다 세를 야냐 더 가지고 이스
So as we study the text, right, we want to understand that all of those minds that we were trying to bring forth within meditation and so forth, all of this comes through these instructions, right? So when we hear these instructions, we should have the motivation that I'm going to keep in a stable way, right, what I have heard. I'm not just going to like forget it after the class.
로저 되는 말라 때문에 다 잡아서 줘봐 다 저도 니가 용들을 때는 다 잡아서 줘봐 다 때문이지
So especially through learning the 7-point mind training, may I perfect the method side of the path. Of course, method and wisdom are included, but mainly the 7-point mind training is a teaching on method.
다 때문에 대화라 때문에 다른 야 라마 좀가만 놓지가 다 보게 된지 차라 방가 다 연습 보게 더 가지고 이소
And also through looking at Lama Tsongkhapa's text in praise of dependent arising, may I hold this information in my mind so that I can use it to realize both subtle and coarse dependent arising.
나로서 다 빙가야 나로서 먹긴 도와리 주 생제 요주 다 총을 단다 바다 다녀다 요야메 바테 데케데 롱치즈도 나즈 마리 파니자 대니를 보게 아주 강강에 바테 그야레스
And these two texts, they are a complete antidote in that we understand that the problems of ourselves and all of the 6 types of beings within samsara can be connected to 2 attitudes, the attitude of self-cherishing and the ignorance grasping of the self. And these 2 texts are an antidote to each of those.
그래서 다 알미니아 야 아마서 동생을 나순기야레 나로서 롱치즈 쳇어봐 이제 알아 못하는 강에 로소용 거 디와스 왜 롱치즈를 하더니 용
Really?
소소로 쳐봐 쳇어내라
And so the way that self-cherishing operates, it's like a little bit if we're greedy for food, right? If we see some very delicious food and we eat a lot of it and then immediately we feel uncomfortable, that discomfort can immediately be connected to our self-cherishing, right? Because our self-cherishing attitude wants more of that delicious thing for ourselves.
이나에 나로서 롱치즈 되게 배도 옆에 첨보서 시업이 너무 하게 알세요레스
Allez, di nyamlenchene.
미셔도 롱치즈 들어봐서 이게 너무 하게 알세요 이나 된다렇게 네 마시와 지주야 말레스
So, and the thing with the self-cherishing is, once again, it's very tricky because it seems sometimes like that self-cherishing is helping us, right? And we're not really able to fully comprehend the harms.
야, 다 가서 너네 로조 대도마 코로 다 내서 디마트가 해서 뉴뉴로 와서 다 딘데와 자세 통해서 뭐다 너지 내가 뭐 할 때는 다 돼요. 다 니도는 말이야.
So in terms of these 7 points of mind training, as you'll see, and I saw that Dave was kind enough to put the text in the chat. If maybe you joined a little bit later, that's where you'll find them. The 7 points are very brief. So usually a commentary is used when teaching this, and Geshe has selected the commentary on this composed by Geshe Togme Sangpo. You might recognize that name because he composed the 37 practices of bodhisattvas.
예송아, 다 동복 예송이.
지sun.
예송아.
안성사와열의 저와열.
동복 코로 자와 대해서 와.
로스.
년도 때지 치点吧是동복 년도了拉吧。是吧？一般业绩上就是这种啊，对不对？
말해. tambo ngonju da la chena milam tabu sa mache ripa shipa chila che. 말이 don't sorry. tambo ngonju da la.
tambo ngonju da la 여자를 데려 이거래서. tambo ngonju da la 진호 몰라 타봐서 마che ripi 실라제 년보니 좀 로사죠. 그진 거라죠. 저지마 지미 다 동보 알레트야 동보티 년도 때지 치temba 동봉년도 달라 못해.
So the 7 points of mind training, we are looking at the root texts. So in terms of the preliminaries, Geshe was reading a bit further, but he thought, no, let's just do the preliminaries. So number 1, the preliminaries, and the instruction is first train in the preliminaries. And so now we will turn to the commentary text, which is explaining those preliminaries. So Geshe is just asking, does everyone have the commentary so that you can follow along? Hopefully you have that link and you can just open that in your browser. And so in terms of the author of this commentary, Geshe Togme Sampo, we can have full confidence that this author was a realized bodhisattva. There's no doubt. Commentary on the 7 points of mind training by the son of the conquerors, Togme Sampo. And so the expression of worship or the homage in the case of this commentary begins with homage to the great compassionate one. So sometimes there are differences in the prostration. Sometimes it says homage to the great compassionate one, and sometimes it says simply like homage to compassion. And so Geshe is also referencing a difference between the Tugje Chenpo and Ningje Chenpo. 개발 간데시 그래. Tugje Chenpo 디 대해서 마와다.
말이 투슈체가 Tugje Chenpo 대 존재 셈비질 마도 매봐. 이 Chenpo 대 년로라 유아래.
So there are two kinds of compassion. And great compassion, according to Geshe said, the commentator from Sedame Monastery, known as Tendar Larampa, he says that when we speak of compassion, this in its fullest form can be possessed by solitary realizers and hearers as well as bodhisattvas. When we speak about great compassion in the full sense, this is only possessed by bodhisattvas. So scholars are saying that the great compassion can be possessed by of those beings, by both the bodhisattvas and the hearers and solitary realizers, but some say that they are only possessed by the bodhisattvas.
원래는 다 유좀비 도마다 네 양다 특별 샤사가 제가 니지 첨부를 샤사가 예선이 와 지바레스
건더기는 칼레칼레 쓴다디 여보
저는 오만지바 옛날에 단다디 옛날에 당공고네라
Mhm.
아니 양다 특별 샤사가 메스 샤스마 자와제 또 니지 첨부를 샤사가 디와스
So you'll see in this text of the commentary on the 7 points of mind training, it begins with homage to the great compassionate one. And in fact, I would say it's homage to great compassionate, to great compassion. And so this is the homage that you find also at the beginning of the Majjhimaka Vatara, of the entering the middle way, because because Chandrakirti said there is nothing more important to offer homage to than great compassion.
대마세 오만지빈 거니면서 제제 림보레스 니지 첨부라 뭐 니지 첨부 거를 제바 샤사 슐로까지
그래서
되네 생제 졸라 미비니지
아
아니 치라 미비니지 메메라 미비니지 샤사 와서 담으라고 뭐 요아레
So in the beginning of the Umalajupa, the Majjhimaka Vatara, first it begins with praising compassion itself. Then it praises the compassion that arises referencing sentient beings. And then it praises the objectless compassion, right? The compassion that is arisen connected with emptiness.
빼가를 잡아래서는 시인가 저 로도 시도도 되는 요아라와 야 시로도 요아라와 깨자 가리는 거면 괜찮아 시로도 세레 신과 야보트는 요아라와스
네.
시도 옛날에 네도 저 옛날에 가리나 호텔 빼자고 야레스 델 토마 가치와 와드 가치와 깔레 가오지 좀 깔레 가라서 좀 아니 타마 가치와 써요 야레스
So it is said that compassion is important in the beginning, the middle, and the end. And this text goes on to give the analogy of a field, right? The compassion is important in the beginning, just like plowing and preparing the field, important in the middle, just like planting the seed and watering it and fertilizing it, and important in the end, just like just like harvesting the fully ripened results.
단데 맞아 따야면 될 수도 리가만 되좀
Yeah, so Geshe said he picked up this tree, he thought, but that's made out of plastic, so there's no question of a seed or a field or anything like that, right?
너지는 토마 가치와 사베도 사베
Vale, toma kecho saben. Sad mare, sad jati soy mare.
토마 가치와 팔아 이거 말해 토마 가치와 사베도 사베
Yeah,
와드 가치와 기도리
yeah.
토마 가치와 리멤버 스네서 요아레스
So sorry, I made a mistake, but Geshe went.
미나는 더 제바치라는 소리요
Okay, so the beginning is like the seed, the middle is like the water and the fertilizer, and the end is like the fully ripened results. In other words, the harvest.
다 제와니지 첨부를 샤사게 제와니지 첨부텔 제세 서테 콜 투근두스
Gimsensum.
토마 가치와 바드 가치와 토마 가치와 제세 서테 콜 송고요아이사 당이 제와니지 첨부를 샤사니
Yeah. And so Chandrakirti explained, this is why I decided out of all of the different things that I could offer homage to the beginning of this great text. I chose compassion. And there are 3 reasons that I chose it, because it's important at the beginning, important in the middle, and important in the end.
아까서 와서 왔다때 미야 제조와이나 하고요 나도 하고요 알아 손지 디서 손지서도 쓰이나 손지는 헬레 되면 와서 지고고는 로 생제게 된다 아프게 치수는 다 남아다 수야돼 소원이지 진비고 보게 영어도 전에 되그래스
And it makes sense also just from the perspective of the teaching. Because how did the teachings that Chandrakirti was commenting upon, Chandrakirti was explaining, come about? They also began with great compassion. Why did the Buddhas turn the wheel of the Dharma? They turned the wheel of the Dharma out of concern for sentient beings, out of great compassion for sentient beings. So from this perspective also, the very presence of the teachings depends upon great compassion.
어떤지 지레서 그러면 다 그냥 같이 먹는 체지야 제수도 다 이제 눈에 다 이제 전부터 쪼지 저기 알아서
So really the sort of important cause here, the substantial cause, is seen as great compassion, and that is why it is praised here.
그래서 어떤 나로서 미야 손주세를 저 예비 때는 정바 전부 이제 전부 고자바이나 손주세 공발 뭐그래 나고 싶어 막 가시 되는 수고 알아서
Diabo komason.
야 아마 가시가 당나로 손주세 좋아요 봐지 아그 그건도 손바요 봐지 아니 손바 공바 있는데 손바 전부 이제 전부 공바 이나 손주세 공발은 그래
So some lamas, they ask the question if the practitioner has a knowledge of bodhicitta, a knowledge for that mind of enlightenment. And specifically thinking about arising that bodhicitta meditates on love and compassion. Does that meditation on love and compassion actually can it be considered a meditation on bodhicitta?
그래서 어다때 알면 뭐 기대가 그냥 같이 뭐지래 타마가 토마가 제와 바드가 제와 야 타마가 제와 어다때 지셀 야지.
So keep in mind how important this great compassion is, something that is important at the beginning, in the middle, and in the end.
다때 소소 고자네라 토마가 제와 간디스제 이제 하고서라와 바드가 제와 제돌리던라와 간디스제
And we can actually meditate on this by thinking of the analogies. How is compassion like the seed? How is it like the water and the fertilizer? How is it like the harvest and so forth? And so Geshe said that also connected with the importance of great compassion, we can use various analogies. Another analogy from the Madhyamakavattara, from the Umalajupa, is the analogy of the water wheel. And so in Lama Tsongkhapa's verse clarifying the intent, he also used this very beautiful analogy of the irrigation wheel or the water wheel. So it's a very famous illustration. Kolodi, chugi kolodi. So then it is said that really if you want to bring forth great compassion, this is one of the best ways to think about it. Here in the three trainings and with mastery of twofold bodhicitta, you spread the Sugata's teachings throughout the 10 directions. As the crowning ornament among all holders of the teachings, incomparable Guru, at your feet I prostrate myself in homage. So this is prostration to the teacher. So explaining also very beautifully in the verse why we are prostrating to the Lama or to the teacher. It is in comprehension of their qualities and that they have mastered the three trainings of ethics, concentration, and wisdom. They have brought forth the twofold bodhicitta, meaning both relative bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. And in addition to that, they are a crowning ornament because they have taken the teachings and for the benefit of sentient beings, spread it in the 10 directions and indeed taught it to many disciples. So, of course, for our temporary needs, training in ethics, concentration, and wisdom, these three trainings is important, more so for liberation, and even more essential if we want to be able to achieve complete enlightenment. And we talk about relative bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta as being like the two wings on the bird, right? It is those two teachings that are going to be able to take them across the ocean of samsara to the other shore. And Sugata is another word for the Buddha. It means one who has gone beyond to that other shore and reached that state of enlightenment. Yeah, soji. Yama. So the 10 directions is the 4 key directions, north, south, east, and west. 4 intermediate directions, south, east, northwest, and so forth, and the direction of up and down. This adds to 10.
다 던지게 다 용조를 다 던지게 다 야버데 바지반제 게다라 마이서 될 상상이.
So, because the Lama has spread to sentient beings in a kind of immeasurable way in all of those directions without exception, I prostrate to them.
던지 바지 다 디서 자와시지 데지로 페데 말린주의 리치테르 까델로메 요요 거와 이거 라메 술라테네 노바예.
The single path traversed by the Buddhas of the 3 times and their heirs, a precious treasury that is the source of all benefit and joy, I shall here set forth in response to the repeated requests of fortunate disciples and in reliance upon the Guru's speech.
다 기가 단단데 좀마 도자데레서 단가를 마서 길에 도자데 하고서와.
So this second paragraph here that starts with the single path, this is what is known as the oath to compose. It's basically the author's promise to complete the text.
다시고 돈바스는 길에 지도차와 있는 마찬델을 드마토는 샤와지만을 됐죠. 오다 들리지는 로요 아레스.
And so with those holy beings, when they make such an oath or a promise, they are sure to complete it. And if they can't for some reason do it in that present lifetime, they will do it in the next lifetime.
동골 보게 이거 좀 누지레스 아레스 동골.
So the oaths of the holy ones are said to be like they are carved in stone. They are very firm.
양아로서 길에 대 고가 놀라. 고가 놀로 못 잡아놓지.
So our promises are like written on the surface of water or written on the surface of snow, right? They will fade away very quickly. Some of us manage to keep a promise for a week, for a couple of months, best for a few years, but we see as ordinary beings, right, in terms of these Dharma promises and commitment, it's very difficult to keep them perfectly. If some of you are very steadfast and stable in this, Geshe offers his heartfelt apologies. So again, the Mamcha di Senadi just Senadi Matsum Bardu or Matsar Bardu Sogi is the double. Yeah, I was just confirming this oath is for completion, right? He will definitely complete the text. So that's the promise to compose the entire text. Kadang Jungjendag yeah. And so in terms of to whom or the audience of this text is, it tells you here in the oath to compose, those fortunate disciples. So why are the words in this verse important? So in terms of why the verse is important, it tells us the Buddhas of the 3 times and their heir, single path. So it is telling us the path is going to be explained. And the treasury is just explaining that this path leads us to not only temporary happiness, but also ultimate happiness. So in this way, it is like a treasury of jewels. The destination that this path leads us to is something very precious. So even when instructed in this life, right, that treasury can be a source of benefit and joy on the temporary level as well. And so the precious treasury, we just think of a vast treasury of jewels and everything that could be wished for.
배바샤 기티에스 이라고요.
So, next verse. Individuals who seek to attain unsurpassable, complete, and perfect awakening, Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, must set their minds upon enlightenment and then exert themselves in the cultivation of both relative and ultimate bodhicitta.
어다 텔레트는 콘라고 다 비야 비다보고요. 아이ทั้ง벌르도 주다치 뭐지 데칼칼가지 지스타리스.
And so, next week, Geshe said, we will cover the kung, which is the scriptural reference for all that he has stated. And in this particular reference, he cites Arya Nagarjuna.
어데레 다 디게다 뭐다 알텐디테 맞은 조슈아.
Okay, so now we will turn to our discussion of In Praise of Dependent Arising.
어다 타게 하지 다른 년도로 지우래 디아레스 근데 같이 뭐게 주저리 디와스 케르 그러냐라 시.
And so just not happy with me saying the preliminaries are long. No, I thought they were good, but they were just kind of long, But he's saying the preliminaries actually, what Geshe was trying to do was give you an overview of the entire method side of the path as an introduction to that method literature, right, of the 7-point mind training.
아, 리라버시나 뭐 기녀라 지셔. 깔깔버시나 지셔.
He's like, if it's too hard, I complain. If it's too easy, I complain. Yeah, it's middle way. Umelam gogi do. Yes, so Geshe said we will proceed happily with our In Praise of Dependent Arising. So Geshe is just explaining why we're going now from method to this text on wisdom. It's because we have this kind of broader understanding, right, that the root of all of the problems is this ignorance grasping at the self. If we want to be able to completely uproot that ignorance grasping at the self, we need to have not only an understanding of force dependent arising, but also an understanding of subtle dependent arising. This is very important. So, of course, all of the antidotes from the method side, right? We talk about the specific antidotes to anger, like patience. We talk about the antidotes to aversion. We talk about the antidotes to attachment. All of those are wonderful when applied. But one thing to keep in mind here is that His Holiness the Dalai Lama has said that if we exert ourselves in wisdom, if we're able to bring forth the wisdom realizing emptiness, and if we're able to bring forth that understanding of subtle dependent arising, this is the supreme antidote that will uproot all of the other afflictions. So at the point you've realized that, then those temporary antidotes are not so necessary. That's something to keep in mind.
다 똥바니 권을 다 보게 야 갈래도 그런 놈아 고요 마셔와지 용거로 왔어. 다 대도 덤번에 찍고서 놈아 또 아니 배도 만다와 자세 다 할래. 배도 만다와 첨버르다 대야와 하고 가지.
소리야 톰파니 고미당 치경상로 마탕이요.
덤번에 찍고서 놈아 또 한테 그 본도 찔러 되게 놈아나 샤시 그랬더니 만다와 첨버지래.
So an important clarification here too. These days, also back in history, right? When people talked about meditating on emptiness, there was this view that meditating on emptiness is just like emptying your mind of thoughts completely. In other words, it's just like completely thinking of nothing. So that meditation, to empty the mind of thoughts, to settle the mind, which is the preliminary, is very different from the actual meditation on emptiness, which is the supreme antidote. So that's important to understand. So not thinking at all, emptying the mind of thoughts, that's great if your focus is just to feel more relaxed. If your focus is to reduce your stress. That's not going to get you to these spiritual goals. So from that perspective, it's definitely not enough.
우리지는 간디스터 그거도 대도못에 손도 그 알아있어.
So how does this process of trying to bring forth this understanding of emptiness begin? We have to examine the self. How do we conceive the self? What is the appearance of the self or the I like? And then we think, if the self were truly existent, what would that self be like? If that self existed from its own side, existed naturally, what would that self be like? And we bring forth kind of that appearance, thinking in that way.
다 가지 라바 따사 나사 따사 라바 데스 주피테지 리포테지 라스.
And so as we examine that, certain things will start to unfold. We'll see that that self that we're examining, its basis of designation, and I'm sorry, I don't know a more elegant English word for this. This is the vocabulary. Its basis of designation is the aggregates, but specifically, we really have the concept when we think of the body, right? Because that's the form aggregate.
따바 노진 저기 주사지 요 아래 손도 요 아래서 말이 바디가.
And ignorance is telling us that that self that's designated in that way, right? It's lying to us and saying it's stable, it's unchanging, it's solid.
그래서 따바 노지든 리근 노네 다 리라바 파자 데테 참모노나 파자야만도 손바지 마치바시는 거 그거 알아.
So what we need to see is that that body that is used as the basis of designation for that self, it is not permanent, it is changing, and it is not stable, it is not solid. It is made up by all of its various parts, down to even the tiniest atoms, right? And then that false appearance will start to fade.
세 라바 노네 드는 세 참모노네 드는 녜르도 다째고 나고치고 도나마 왜렌도 아스.
And then we can think, maybe look at another aggregate, like, is consciousness? Where is the self in the mind? Is there a self that we can pinpoint on the basis of the coarser minds? Is there a self that we can pinpoint on the basis of the more subtle minds? Where is it?
아까서라서 어따 리근 노네 뭔데 세근 노네 뭔데 다 차시에 고나요 다 때니 보겠는 거 다지 뭔데 소 마치거나 다 띵고 주고 가서 더 그냥 같이 뭐 이사랬어.
So we'll come to a conclusion at the end of this journey of exploration, thinking there is no pinpointable self in the body. There is likewise no pinpointable self in the mind. There is no pinpointable independent self whatsoever. There is no self that exists from its own side whatsoever. And then at that point, we shift from the analytical meditation to to a more placement meditation at that point.
다 밑반 저기 주사 때니 매바지 좋다 그 여름에 때에서 보게 하바 이나요. 아까서라.
테슬라바이나 주스자 테스
때에서 좀 하바 이나요. 아니 나도 샤 제가서 됐고요. 샤치 보게 하바 이나. tel mbekor le ngor was
shashi but tes yom before we switch to this placement meditation, we should be sure that any trace of that thinking of there's some sort of pinpointable self that is there, that has been completely eradicated. It is said that we have to be like the butcher who is cleaning, sorry for the example, vegetarian folks, I'm also vegetarian, the butcher who clears every last piece of meat from his or her table because they don't want the flies to come. We have to make sure any trace of that independent existence is gone. So just like if we leave even just a tiny trace of meat on that counter, we know that the flies are going to come. Similarly, if we have just a tiny trace of thinking that there's some pinpointable, naturally existent self, anger and aversion will come. Di bardu jugo machina yagadus. Another thing, placement meditation is not feeling your experiences. Placement meditation is a single-pointed focus on the object. So whatever experiences might be unfolding, even if they seem pleasant or blissful, Those are distractions from your object. That's another important thing to remember with placement meditation.
아까서라와서 어떤 주고가를 여본 도시 요도메 치 동산이라 주고를 치 주고 파자산이라
Yeah.
아까서 주고 많이 빌가라 사도시에서 예때라 아참 통선문라고 누구는 누구 또 대대래 마도 주고가를 주도 자요 말이지.
So if you want to check, well, how's my meditation going? You don't do that during the placement meditation. When you come out of the placement meditation during the meditation break, if you're encountering an object or a person you're attached to, if you're encountering an object or person that you have aversion to, see if your experience of that person has shifted due to the meditation. That's the way to measure success. Yeah, so very important points there about meditation on emptiness. So we have to do at least one verse. So we'll do the verse. So we are on the third page, and I will read from the translation y'all have.
몸비 텐데 주와이 고시 체도 현리바 대니 로지 매비다 머세 절라 살찌 살찌
So I should use in the Halem Ngodrup. So, verse 22. To some, hostile to you, held as the slaves of ignorance, are unable to bear the sounds of no self-nature, comes as no surprise.
어떤 디슐로 같이 되게 조 당하로서 고할 거대지 땡줄로 로바슈는 땡줄로 따도 노네라 아니 다시라야 보던 로도야 말해.
So because of a mistaken understanding of dependent arising, we are not able to realize emptiness. And this is part of what keeps us rooted in samsara, rooted in this cyclic existence.
땡줄로 로바 간디세니 단 로기야. 이제 그냥 저도 제 가르라 때는 로기야. 땡데지장이야.
Attention lokpa senadi loktagi lokro. Yeah, so this is explaining how this false understanding, this mistaken understanding of dependent arising arises.
그래서 다 지세 뜻다지. 몸비 제한테 주와이. 되게 제지로. 몸비도
So held as the slaves of ignorance.
몸비 제한테 주와이. 그래서 몸바 말이 비게 제운다고.
So enslaved means it's an unfortunate word. I'd like to think of some other way to translate this. But anyways, the idea is it is you're indentured to somebody. You are completely under someone's control. So in that way, we are completely under the control of ignorance.
고순이다.
고순.
그래서 어다 지지 될라 되네. 뭔가 말이 비게 손에 따가로래 손으로는 다 걸어서 뒤에 다 맞세 걸어 뒤에 요보.
고순 미가야다 보지.
말이 비게 요보 차서 말해서 맞세 걸어.
So they become, because they are slaves, they become kind of indentured to ignorance for their whole life.
아까 살아와서 어다 말이 비서만 누지래 세아다마도 될 전에 바 디슈 될
So thinking that what ignorance is telling them is correct, right? They never bother to question their mistaken view or their mistaken path.
공시 체도 현지바 소지 쪼대데 저런도 현지바세 저럴 마가와 지내나
미가와서는 미가와 첨보테스라. Like 강화기 미가와. Yeah. And so in the Tibetan, the next line comes first. Then that some hostile to you. So the ones, because of this ignorance, right, they are hostile to the Buddha's teaching. Close.
Yes, 어다 대이 로지메 비다 마제슬라 차치예 로지메 비다텔라 아니 드라마가와 지바 이나요. 바테 치 동보테 치 동보테 니네서는 노와가 다시 로마 데바 세촌발라소바 거지. 치 니바테 다시 로바도 던질 거야.
Okay, so they're unable, because of that aversion, unable even to hear the sound of no self-nature. Now, Geshe said there's something interesting here. And when you change the order of things in English, things become a little bit confused, just saying. So, held as the slaves of ignorance means those who are holding to an ultimate soul. In other words, those non-Buddhist schools of Indian philosophy at the time. Those hostile to you, Ramatsongkhapa is using that label to describe the other schools of emptiness, other than the middle way school.
그래서 어다 셔로 뭐든 더더 걸어서 땡주세지 시시기 할때 이나요 루지트 아주 유잖아 그런 데 얘기 하러 왔어.
Yeah. So they are explaining nominally, right, the Vaibhasikas and the Chittamantrans and so forth. They are nominally explaining dependent arising, but they are still holding on to that little bit of self-existence.
그래서 어다 셔로 빠르지도 하고서 셔로 빠르지 로지 메비 다텔 담 방가와서 남데 어다 되는 데와 메바서나 달래야기 문드스 이사마티.
So what they're saying is that, like, if the people who are not Buddhists are not kind of wanting to hear the sound of no self-nature, comes as no surprise, right? Because we wouldn't expect them to want to hear that, because their philosophy is something different.
민제세 가르를 걸어서 땡주 걸어게 레기야 말때 이자더니 로지 메바 비만을 하려야 말이지.
So why is it no surprise that they don't want to hear the sound of no self-nature? Because they don't even really, at least in the Buddhist sense of the word, they're not even really holding dependent arising. So then it's not surprising that they wouldn't want to hear about no self-nature.
다 땡주 키레니라 셔로 뭐도 너데바도 세서바 걸어서 와.
Yeah.
땡주 키레니라 다들 로지지 요아래 잘라바 이렇게 다 데려야 셈보지레스.
But even worse than that, what Tsongkhapa is saying is hostile is those who are from the other schools of tenets, saying that that's pretty polemics. What can you do? So they are saying that those other schools of tenets, they're saying they hold dependent arising. They are holding on to that view that there's some kind of self-nature. So those are the ones deemed hostile, right? The people who are nominally following Buddhist philosophy, but still arguing that.
치키 멀레키 다 된다 내와시나 싫어야 싫어야 말아 와 치키 레기라 제일 내와시 돼야ছে 뭐래 나오시나 세가 된다.
And so, so for those who are saying that they're not Buddhist and not really holding dependent arising, if they speak against this idea of no self-nature, that's not such a big deal, right? If people who are claiming to profound Buddhist tenets are speaking against this ultimate understanding of self-nature, then that is something that could be damaging, right? Therefore, it is hostile.
어단디서 서다티 저렇게 제 모자로 시서와. 미사를.
지사.
어다게 저 뭐지 대대 어다 근데지 다 어다 가세트 다 말이 베게 다 보게 요번도 마차알. 다 텔레 발로스로 하게 같이.
So we will stop here actually because we are running out of time. So Geshe said that then as much as possible from hearing this verse, just make a determination. I want to be less of, I'm going to say, servant to ignorance. I want to be less of a servant to ignorance. Just make that determination.
어다 말이 바게 다 보게 영어도 매바다 로토 바치 다 된데 가서 tet서도 바치 속이지 생각자.
I want to be less of a servant to ignorance because I don't want to be under control of something beyond my control. I want to achieve a meaningful independence and freedom, that of liberation.
나로서 나세 드리스 로사요 다테 할래야 말을 했어. 이네지나.
That the self can reach that point beyond ignorance to that state of liberation is really something amazing, isn't it? So with this understanding and determination, with a happy mind, engage in your study and practice. So thank you, and we shall, with a happy mind, make the dedications. If you need to go afterwards, please feel free. If you'd like to hang out for questions, please feel free.
Jamjo semjo rinpoche maje bana jejo reji jewa nyamba mepa yang gone gondo bewa sho tongni tawa rinpoche maje bana jejo reji 제와 냠바 메바야 고네 고나 베오 쇼 잠베바 지다 게바다 군두 상고데요 데저데 데다 군주 지수라나지 예와 도도 동지라도 고 데스 샤빙 예와 동지 와와 골라 초등 아바드 다기 계획 사와드 거죠 상보 주지 라등 와
나로서 다시와 몸에 버는 사빌랭의 간디지어가 이나 따뜻파 세비가 저런도 하지냐.
Through the merits of our efforts here, may every single negative action that we have accumulated from beginningless time until the present be completely purified, completely cleared away.
루루소소 소마노지 다쇼바도 니지도 존주지 세토니도 싫어하지바. 주보질시토가지.
May I be able to, exactly according to my wishes, able to bring forth the realization of love, compassion, bodhicitta, wisdom realizing emptiness in my mind stream.
다 로아를 주스다 senjiuzul padeshi ema chawan moji padeshi tetogaji.
Through these merits, may the sun of happiness shine on all 6 types of beings within samsara, without exception. So we'll pause there. I'll just turn the volume up a little bit in case there's questions. Please go ahead. Are there any questions?
I have a quick question. I was just wondering, Tonlen and emptiness, like how do they relate to one another? And what, when you're looking at emptiness, like what, not emptiness, when you're looking at Tonlen, how does it, in what context does it come into Buddhist philosophy? I just was wondering.
Buddhist philosophy in terms of emptiness, you mean?
The thought of like emptiness, like in terms of emptiness.
Tonglen dang company drawa kandes chik yores. Ane tonglen samlo tang na company kandes chik samlo tang go kire duas. Ko chiwa dire.
Tole sono tonatne.
Company kandes jutok yores. Company dang drawa kare yores da wachi. I think we're both puzzled by your question, to be honest. We could have an understanding that suffering and happiness don't exist from their own side, and because they are empty, it is possible to be able to get rid of suffering and to achieve happiness. We could relate it that way, maybe.
So if
the suffering of other sentient beings was inherently existent, for example, then we wouldn't be able to change that. We wouldn't be able to free them. Mm-hmm. Is this what you were looking for? Or I feel like you're kind of thinking like you want to meditate on emptiness and Tonglen at the same time. Is like, Can you clarify a bit?
Yeah, my question is, I guess, in what context of method does Tonlen come in the context of method of emptiness when we're practicing? Does that make sense?
Well, when we talk about method and wisdom, Tonglen is more method, emptiness is more wisdom. That's the division, right?
Okay, and Tonlen falls into the compassion?
Tonglen sena ta, Tonglen sena ningjirwa. Yes, so Tonglen is the method side of practice, yes.
Oh, that's what I wanted to figure out. That's what I was asking.
Yes. Okay, cool. No, I'm glad we got there. That's why I like to clarify sometimes, so thank you. Decent.
What up me tanda tenisione shoto ni pachegarta shoto.
Geshe is saying that, like, if as you practice the Tonglen, the method practice, you can have that awareness that the suffering of sentient beings lacks inherent existence, for example, just taking that little bit of the wisdom aspect, that's actually going to make the Tonglen more powerful. Well, yeah. Yeah. 롱동진.
야 오늘 녀래 샤디니 민지 단다들 소노마 또 내라용
Yeah.
소마도 니지 집어 소노 또 녀래 샤요 알아봤어.
So, of course, you could practice Tonglen just taking love and compassion and not thinking about the emptiness of the suffering or happiness. So, it's not required, right? But it could enhance.
어때 보십시오. 할레비야 버렸다. 단다들 째는 단다니 버치가래.
So, of course, and that's a wonderful way to practice just exclusively with the method side. But if you take a little bit of wisdom into it as well, that will make it even more powerful.
또다 세나 야래야 가라.
Yeah, but generally, Tonglen is a method practice, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome, Elisa. It's quiet today, and there are a few people here. Any questions? Geshe's like, don't force them to ask questions. Not forcing, just want to make sure. Dave, is there anything on Facebook or anything?
I have a question.
Oh, yes, go ahead. Yep.
When we learn about the not grasping at the self, are we also saying the experience of I am, that felt experience of being I am, is that also part of the ignorance, or is that only the felt experience of I am without creating a self? I don't know if it makes sense, the question. And
I
the
think so.
other part of the question is, if someone is in pain and has, for example, let's say back pain, and they have had pain for a long period of time, the non-grasping at the self becomes very difficult for them because the pain manifests a strong sense of self. How would you guide someone who has pain into this understanding of the self is a construct and empty of inherence? That's the second part of the question. And the first part was, in my personal experience, in my own...
Sorry, can I just do these two parts first? Because if I get so much input, I won't be able to so I will come back to you. But I want to do part 1 and 2 first, just while I'm remembering. Is that okay?
Yes, of course.
Yes, yeah, we'll come back to you. Okay. That's what somebody nganso di dag serie di rwa, nganso di dag serie di, nganso di dangzen di kola samlo tangna, rwa. Dangzen di pangna, then nganso nga yin gi tsorwa chik me drogire bes, rwa. Nga mi yins, nga mi di yins, then so chatsangwa me drogire di chik che. Ane dene chiwa nipa di, nganso hale pe su gyaya chenpo chik yona, su gyaya gi tsorwa di, dene nga pe shuk chiru droge dua, kari insena kange chenpo chik yoris. Dene nganso su jape chenpo kaplo la ya, rwa, kandes lao gare, dagme kandes samlo tangure, dangzin kandes nyungru tangure, chiwa ni dua.
Ota neme danza mari pa men rore to nga ti seate to men ro marwas.
So the for your first question, in terms of the ignorance grasping at the self, when that is diminished through practice, our experience of the self and I am, that doesn't go away. It's not like that's going to completely go away. So the answer is no to the first question.
Isui ote mega ke yo mar nga mai da nga ji seate nyo raki mares te koro ji ni ne srawas.
Because conventional truth is still there, right? We are still walking this world. We are still ourselves. We are still interacting. So from that point of view of the relative, that's all still there. So it doesn't like disappear or anything.
Mi kolo lu bai su ki mares.
Yeah. It's just that we're not thinking that experience has inherent existence. That's all.
Ta zu ja gre ta ya yar ta pena jipa do tri na. Hakosare.
Loso.
Ta lig na sa do tri na o bitis chedo de peto te yung si gre ta te o to mi ga chi marwa. Hakosarwa. Ta pena jipa na o do sel jipa. Wa du jo.
그래주세.
So du jo.
pena sugyaya tenide nganso jigpa chikyo nge subuna chikno.
Ta zu ja ya sen kari ta ya yores. Hakosarwa ta lig na sa da wo chi ne te li la wo do mundu te ze pesi gre was chi do.
So, in terms of when the person is experiencing pain, you're right. Because of the kind of like intense nature of that experience, meditating on a selflessness is going to be a little bit difficult.
다이나 배배도 매봐도 말 왔을 텐데 배야 배 비시그레스.
It's not that it won't be beneficial at all. It's just harder, but it could actually bring them benefit.
다 배도 최사대 가야 알았으나 할 레비스도 이빠치 뭐 여기가. 이제 제 맨에 초와도 저 슈터볼 레야리아레스. 모두 두자더니 레야레.
For example, when you're experiencing fear because of that, when you're experiencing fear of your own mentality or some kind of like fearful feeling or some kind of like mental projection around that, you know, connected with it, then it could be very beneficial.
당알까니 첨부 슈송라고 초와도 저 슈터볼 여기가 와더니라. 와 두만이 손어도나 땡데 배도 알았어.
And especially when the pain is being thought about in this way, I have this huge problem. I have this huge insurmountable problem. This is so difficult. If you can think about emptiness at that point, that can really help to deflate that sort of way of thinking.
디딜nga 사실도 주자리라 진짜 또 땡데로 와지 말했어. nga 초와슈 더보지 알아왔어. 나가도.
Yeah.
nga 반에 주문도 이런 거 좋아요 배가 등가서 가와도. 하가서라 나는 거니마 자체바시 세계 눈을 가와도 어떤 자체바시는 꼰지 주사지 매아이자 그래서 좋아하는 말했어.
So the self, which is experiencing this pain, is so prominent at that moment. But if you have your wits about you, in other words, if you're not completely overwhelmed by the pain, you can think, this experiencer of the pain, that's the self, that's the I. Where is that I? And you can try to point to different parts of your body and locate that I, and different parts of the mind and locate that I. You can still do exercises like that in that moment. And it's kind of beneficial that that sense of self in that moment is very prominent.
손진 좀벌리려 옆이가 손질을 곧다 누가 말해 그렇게 들어가세. 뭐지도 왔어. 그래서 저러 번하고 지사다 너무 다이나면 그 누가래면도 왔어. 이나 그 손질 할래 바본도 왔어.
So there was a man at the time of the Buddha who really liked the Buddha, but he wasn't specifically a follower of the Buddhist teachings. He wasn't necessarily a Buddhist.
And at
the end of his life, he became very handicapped. He wasn't able to move, and he was beset with like really terrible pain. And then he started to become fearful because he saw that he was nearing the end of his life. And so then some of his friends thought, well, what could we do to comfort him at this time? Well, he really liked the Buddha. So wouldn't it be wonderful if the Buddha could come here and help them? And of course, the Buddha, possessing clairvoyance, he was able to come there immediately. Yeah, so we understand the Buddha can be anywhere, like in a finger snap, right? They're not like inhibited by having to walk or whatever. So then it was said that the Buddha, when he arrived at his bedside, he taught him exactly this meditation, saying, focus inside and think, where is that self that is experiencing the pain? Is it in the head? Is it in the throat? Is it in some place in the body? Is it in a feeling? Is it in the mind? And in this way, actually, from really being able to meditate like that, his pain lessened considerably, and he was able to pass away in a state of peace. So in the sutra it says that he says like all fear has been banished through this way of thinking, right? So at least all of the fear connected with the pain was gone. So it definitely could be a little bit beneficial for sure. Yeah, but Geshe said certainly when we're experiencing tremendous physical illness and pain, it's not the easiest thing to do. Yeah. So this is the way of thinking. So you could propose something like this.
Oh yeah, yes.
You had a final part, sir. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that was really helpful. Thank you. The final part I was just going to say, is it then okay to meditate on the I am as part of emptiness rather than creating a self? And I think that's sometimes confusing because when I focus on the I am, it's actually emptiness, not the self.
Nga di yin samlo tana ko tambo dire ro angan so company tongna dene nga di yin smedro gi dwa nga di yin samlo tangna di yang tongpani gi gomjayarbes dites kalakawaro.
Nga te yi sena tu mani go jaya mares.
Saying I am is not meditation on emptiness. No, we couldn't say that.
Te yi sena tu marwa.
No.
Maybe nga te yi sena tu senga ta ngaro ji atma sayina ta shi yi. Nju yi. Oh te sena. Oh ni ka denda se chi ha
So-
ta. Ya ko targa lo ko te lo ngine ji ma to. Ni ne ba shi ga mare.
Yeah, so it's not that like having this awareness of I am, for example, like I am Tashi, which is kind of like saying I am Jim, right? It's a common Tibetan name, or I am Pema, or something like that. That's not going to harm emptiness, but you can't say that thinking that is emptiness, right?
Nga te yi sa te yi na yo. Ene ta ba ji yo ma to. Ro ni chi me sena ta tu mani yo lan ro ya.
But if you start to think I am Tashi, I am not Tashi, independent existing from my own side. I am Tashi, arising dependence upon other factors, and am therefore lacking inherent existence. Then you could change it to a meditation on
Mo
emptiness.
ta so no to mo bo dias. Oh ta me zo ta so ji yo ma to.
Yes.
Nga ta shi sa te ko ro zo chu da chi me.
So we talk about being merely labeled, merely named, right? Merely named or merely labeled the I, merely labeled or merely named Tashi on the basis of the coming together of those parts.
This way.
Decent.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ya tumba ni che ba she sa nga sa tin bo re shi.
Yeah.
Zo chi.
Yeah. And really, when we're meditating on emptiness, we start with the I. We start with the self. That's the most powerful place to start.
Ya ngo chu sa na bo ten yo le she sa chwa.
That's where we begin the practice. Last chance for questions.
Ta du ni mo nge ten du ni ri ta so te ne tis ni to me ne ti ja ji is.
So if there are no questions, we'll leave here. And Geshe's promising you a story next time. We're out of time. But if you come next Sunday, you'll get a story.
Ka zo ngo ma te ten du la ma la ya res.
Yeah. It's actually a continuation of a story that he's told previously, but there's, I guess, another chapter to it, if you will.
Ta ba ji ma ti ro.
Yeah, so we'll do that next week.
Ya tu che.
So I guess we'll end here. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thank you so much. It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.